Did you know the highest and lowest points in the lower 48 sit just about 88 miles apart in California? Or that parts of the state have literally sunk by dozens of feet because we pumped too much water from underground? Or that a prehistoric lake 5 times larger than the Salton Sea has flooded and vanished from Southern California again and again? California isn't just a state. It's a geological experiment in fast forward. So settle in, because we're about to lay out 50 wild California facts that sound made up, but are 100% real. We're counting from Fact 50 down to Fact 1. Fact 50. A lake older than civilization and its rival. Mono Lake in eastern California is often described as one of North America's oldest lakes, with estimates around 760,000 years, and possibly much older, maybe back 1 to 3 million years. It never fully dried out during ice ages, so minerals and salts just kept building up, turning it into a bizarrely salty, alkaline inner sea. Nearby Clear Lake in Northern California is also in the running. Some geologists argue its basin has been active for hundreds of thousands to a couple million years, making it another contender for oldest. So if you hear Californians arguing over which is the oldest lake in North America, they're not just bragging. Their lakes really have been around longer than most civilizations. Fact 49. California's accidental sea. That wasn't the first. You've probably heard that the Salton Sea was created by accident when engineers lost control of the Colorado River in 1905 and it flooded a dry desert basin for nearly 2 years. That part's true. But what sounds fake is this. That basin has flooded over and over for thousands of years. Long before any dams, the Colorado River sometimes flowed north instead of south, filling the Salton Trough with Lake Cahuilla, a freshwater lake that was about 6 times larger than today's Salton Sea, stretching roughly 100 miles long and 30-plus miles wide. For indigenous communities, that giant lake was a rich fishery and transportation corridor. So the accidental Salton Sea is really just the latest chapter in a very old story. Fact 48. California's hidden supervolcano. Near Mammoth Lake sits the Long Valley Caldera, one of the biggest supervolcanoes on Earth. About 760,000 years ago, it erupted so violently it blasted out roughly 600 cubic kilometers of ash, enough to cover much of California and blanket parts of the western U.S. in fallout. Today, the caldera looks like a peaceful high valley with hot springs and ski lifts. But the ground is still rising and falling. CO2 can kill trees, and earthquake swarms keep scientists on 24/7 watch. It's California's quieter answer to Yellowstone, a giant sleeping just under the surface. Fact 47. When a storm turned Los Angeles tropical. Southern California practically never gets direct hits from tropical storms. But in 1939, one slipped through, known as El Cordonazo, or the Lash of St. Francis. It came ashore near Long Beach with tropical storm force winds and dumped around 5 inches of rain in a day on parts of the LA area. Houses washed into the ocean, the LA River exploded out of its banks, and around 100 people died. The region was so caught off guard that the very next year, the federal government opened a dedicated weather office for Southern California. One storm literally changed how the West Coast watches the sky. Fact 46. A fire tornado with 143 miles per hour winds. In 2018, during the Carr Fire near Redding, extreme heat and wind created something that looked like CGI, a real fire tornado. This flaming vortex reached winds estimated around 143 miles per hour, strong enough for the National Weather Service to rate it like a powerful EF3 tornado. It ripped trees from the ground, twisted steel power poles, and stripped bark off trunks. Firefighters had to retreat because the fire wasn't just burning, it was spinning like a blender. California wildfires don't just burn forests. Under the right conditions, they can build their own weather. Fact 45. Highest and lowest, closer than some commutes. California holds both the highest point and lowest point in the contiguous United States, and they're practically neighbors. Mount Whitney rises to about 14,505 feet above sea level, while Badwater Basin in Death Valley drops to 282 feet below sea level. The two extremes sit only about 88 miles apart as the crow flies. You can literally go from snow-dusted alpine granite to a scorching salt pan that feels like another planet in a weekend road trip. Fact 44. The fault that runs through a football stadium. California has more than 700 mapped earthquake faults, and around 10,000 quakes hit the state every year, most too small to feel. The celebrity is the San Andreas Fault, an 800-mile-long boundary where the Pacific Plate grinds past North America. But one of the busiest is actually the Hayward Fault in the Bay Area, sometimes called the most urbanized fault in the United States. It cuts right through neighborhoods, under streets that slowly bend, and straight through the middle of UC Berkeley's Memorial Stadium, where engineers literally had to build expansion joints into the bleachers to let the ground creep. So when Californians say the earth moves under their feet, they might mean it literally moves under their football field. Fact 43. The mud pot that refuses to stay put. Out in Imperial County, there's a weird, bubbling gray mud pots cluster people nicknamed the Neeland Geyser. It isn't actually a lake, and it's not a classic geyser either. It's a CO2-charged mud spring that moves. Since the mid-2000s, it's slowly migrated hundreds of feet, swallowing signs, threatening rail lines, and forcing engineers to reroute a highway and build deep steel walls that it simply flowed around. There's no monster here, just chemistry and geology. But this slow-motion mud blob has cost millions and proven you can't always tell moving Earth. Stay. Fact 42. The stones that sailed across the desert. On Racetrack Playa in Death Valley, big rocks, some weighing hundreds of pounds, leave long trails as if they've slid across the dry lake bed all on their own. For decades, nobody had ever seen them move. In 2014, researchers finally caught the process on time-lapse cameras. After rare winter rains, a thin ice sheet forms on the flooded playa. As the morning sun breaks the ice into floating panels, light winds push those panels, ever so gently nudging the rocks across slick mud at a few inches per minute. No aliens, no magnets, just ice, wind, water, and patience, making one of the strangest sights in the desert. Fact 41. California has a valley that's literally sinking. California's San Joaquin Valley, one of the most productive farm regions on Earth, is slowly collapsing. Decades of pumping groundwater for cities and crops have compacted the aquifers so much that some areas have sunk over 25 to 30 feet since the early 1900s, and in places are still dropping more than a foot per year. You can see the scars everywhere. Cracked roads, buckled canals, and bridges that suddenly don't line up. It's such a large-scale change that satellites can literally see the valley sagging from space. A man-made, slow-motion landslide. Fact 40. 3 world record trees in one state. Texas loves to say everything's bigger there, but when it comes to trees, California quietly wins the Triple Crown. Tallest tree. A coast redwood nicknamed Hyperion stands around 380 feet, tucked deep inside Redwood National and State Parks on the northern coast. Largest tree by volume. The General Sherman Giant Sequoia in Sequoia National Park, with more than 52,000 cubic feet of wood. Oldest known non-clonal tree. An unnamed bristlecone pine in the White Mountains, measured at over 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids. All 3 live in one state. If you're a tree nerd, California is basically the Champions League. Fact 39. The trees that drink fog. Along the north coast, California's redwoods survive long, dry summers by drinking the sky. Coastal fog drifts in from the Pacific, condenses on their needles, and drips down to the forest floor in what scientists call fog drip. In some summers, up to 40% of a redwood's water can come from fog instead of rain. If you walk a redwood grove on a foggy morning and it sounds like it's raining while the forecast says clear, that's the trees quietly tapping the clouds like a natural irrigation system. Fact 38. Flies with DIY scuba suits. Back to Mono Lake for a second. Its water is so salty and alkaline that it's been compared to cleaning solution, yet it's packed with life, including alkali flies that wander around underwater like tiny divers. Their bodies are covered in microscopic hairs and wax that trap a shimmering bubble of air around them as they walk under the surface to graze algae and lay eggs. They pop back up, still dry, in what Mark Twain once described as looking like submarine flies. California, where even the insects invent their own gear. Fact 37. The giant bathtub drain that turned back on in 2025. In Lake Berryessa in Napa County, there's a huge round hole in the lake that looks like the planet glitched. It's the Morning Glory spillway, better known as the Glory Hole. A 72-foot wide concrete funnel that acts like a massive bathtub drain when the lake gets too full. Most years it sits high and dry, but after a run of powerful winter storms, the lake reached about 443 feet above sea level, and in February 2025, water started roaring into the Glory Hole again for the first time since 2019. Crowds clogged the highway just to watch a lake pour itself down a perfectly round hole. Fact 36. Camels, flamingos, and saber-toothed cats in the Mojave. The Mojave Desert looks empty now, but its fossil record says otherwise. Near Barstow, paleontologists have dug up bones of camels, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, turtles, and even flamingos, all living here when wetlands and lakes dotted what's now one of the driest parts of California. Next time you pass a sun-baked freeway exit out there, remember you're driving across the old floor of a vanished safari. Fact 35. The dunes that hum like a giant bass speaker. In the Kelso Dunes of the Mojave, the sand can actually sing. Under the right conditions, very dry, very fine sand slipping down steep slopes, the whole dune lets out a low, booming note that can last for minutes. It's called booming, or singing sand, and only about 30 dune fields in the world have the right grain size and humidity to pull it off. Sit on the slope, slide down, and you'll feel the vibration in your chest like a distant engine. Fact 34. Los Angeles sneaky land grab. Look at a map of Los Angeles and you'll see a weird narrow strip of city stretching south toward the harbor. That's the shoestring strip, a skinny corridor, sometimes less than a mile wide, that LA annexed in 1909 to reach San Pedro and Wilmington and lock in its own deep water port. It's basically a municipal tentacle that let LA jump over other towns to grab what would become the busiest container port in the United States. Without that move, Southern California's economic map would look very different. Fact 33. A lake big enough to soak the state. Lake Tahoe isn't just pretty, it's enormous. If you spread all of Tahoe's water evenly over California, the state would be under about a foot of water. At roughly 1,645 feet deep, it could hide the Empire State Building with room to spare. Most of its basin lies within the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, part of the National Forest System, not a national park. And thanks to its depth and constant mixing, Tahoe almost never freezes over, even in harsh winters. Fact 32. The world's smallest mountain range. North of Sacramento, an isolated ring of volcanic hills called the Sutter Buttes rises abruptly from flat farmland. They're only about 10 miles across and roughly 2,000 feet high, which is why they're often nicknamed the world's smallest mountain range. To the local Maidu people, this was where the Earth's creator came to rest after finishing the world. Today, the buttes are mostly private, but guided hikes let visitors walk through what feels like an island of rock in a sea of crops. Fact 31. Ghost redwoods that filter poison. Hidden among normal redwood groves are rare albino redwoods, trees with pale, almost white needles. Because they lack chlorophyll, they can't make their own food, so they graft their roots into nearby redwoods and siphon off sugars like botanical freeloaders. When scientists studied them, they found these ghost trees also soak up toxic heavy metals at much higher levels than normal redwoods, acting like natural pollution filters. They're clinging to life in one of the strangest ways a tree ever has. Fact 30. Moonbows in Yosemite. In Yosemite National Park, rainbows don't just belong to the daytime. On spring and early summer nights when the waterfalls are roaring, the sky is clear, and the moon is near full. The mist from Yosemite Falls can bend moonlight into a pale, glowing moonbow. They're faint to the naked eye, but pop in long exposure photos. Ghostly arcs over a 2,425-foot waterfall, the tallest in North America. It's one of those, did that really just happen? Moments that California specializes in. Fact 29. San Francisco and Los Angeles are on a collision course. San Francisco sits on the North American plate. Los Angeles rides the Pacific plate, which is sliding northwest along the San Andreas at a couple inches per year. Over millions of years, that motion will drag LA closer to San Francisco, eventually putting the two regions roughly side by side. Zoom the clock out far enough, and a big chunk of coastal California and Baja California slowly migrates toward what's now British Columbia. To a geologist, the state line is just a suggestion. The continent itself is rearranging the map. Fact 28. The city that never really happened. In the Mojave, there's a grid of paved streets visible from space with almost nothing built on them. This is California's city, dreamed up in the 1950s as a rival to Los Angeles. Developers laid out hundreds of miles of roads, but the people never followed. Today, it's California's third largest city by land area, but only about 15,000 people live there, clustered in one section. The rest is a ghost grid of empty intersections surrounded by desert scrub, a full-scale model of a metropolis that never arrived. Fact 27. Fun-sized mammoths on the islands. During the last ice age, Columbian mammoths swam or waded to California's Channel Islands when sea levels were lower. Once stranded there with limited food, evolution dialed them down into dwarf mammoths only about 5 to 6 feet tall at the shoulder, roughly the size of a big pony. Their fossils show how islands can shrink giants into miniatures in just a few thousand years. Imagine seeing a mammoth you could basically high-five. Fact 26. Devil's Postpile, nature's hexagon wall. At Devil's Postpile in the Sierra Nevada, a cliff of perfectly geometric stone columns looks like someone built a giant hexagonal pipe organ. In reality, it's cooled basalt lava that cracked into columns as it slowly solidified, then got polished by glaciers scraping across the top. The result is so precise, it's often compared to Ireland's Giant's Causeway. Stand at the base and it's hard not to feel like you're staring at the understructure of the world. If you're learning something new about California already, hit that like button, subscribe to The World Blueprint, and drop your own local fact in the comments, especially if you live in California and you're thinking, hey, you forgot my town's crazy story. Alright, back to it. Fact 25. A living skyscraper named General Sherman. In Sequoia National Park's giant forest stands the General Sherman tree, the largest single tree on Earth by volume. It's about 275 feet tall, with a trunk over 36 feet wide at the base, and holds more than 52,000 cubic feet of wood, the equivalent of hundreds of millions of pencils. It weighs an estimated 1,300 plus tons, roughly 2 fully loaded 747s, and it's still growing. Every year, it adds enough new wood to equal a decent-sized normal tree. Fact 24. The Midnight Fish Rave. On certain spring and summer nights along Southern California beaches, the shoreline turns silver and alive. That's the Grunion Run, when thousands of California grunion ride waves onto the sand, lay eggs, and then flop back into the ocean. They're one of the few fish that intentionally beach themselves to spawn. Locals bring flashlights and blankets to watch the sand erupt in tiny, wriggling bodies under the moonlight. It's equal parts wildlife documentary and fever dream. Fact 23. A boiling, rainbow-colored hellscape. In Lassen Volcanic National Park lies Bumpass Hell, a 16-acre field of hissing vents, boiling mud pots, and surreal blue pools. The hottest vent, Big Boiler, has been measured at around 322 degrees Fahrenheit, 161 degrees Celsius, making it one of the hottest fumaroles on Earth. It's named after an early guide, Kendall Bumpass, who fell through the crust and badly burned his leg. Today, wooden boardwalks keep visitors from repeating his mistake as they walk through what looks like a Technicolor version of the underworld. Fact 22. The Lake LA turned into a dust storm. Owens Lake in eastern California used to be a shimmering 110-square-mile lake fed by Sierra Nevada streams. Then, starting in 1913, Los Angeles diverted most of its tributaries into the LA Aqueduct. By the 1920s, Owens Lake was mostly dry. The exposed lake bed became the worst source of PM10 dust pollution in the country, laced with salts and metals. LA has since spent over $1 billion flooding and managing parts of the playa to reduce toxic dust, a cautionary tale in water management that's still literally in the air. Fact 21. Tulare Lake, California's zombie inland sea. In the 1800s, Tulare Lake in the southern San Joaquin Valley was the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi, a vast inland sea fed by Sierra rivers. Then settlers dammed and diverted those rivers, and by the early 1900s the lake was plowed under into farmland. But in 2023, after a barrage of atmospheric river storms, Tulare Lake came back, flooding over 100,000 acres of fields and orchards, swallowing roads and buildings. Locals call it a ghost lake or zombie lake because it keeps reappearing whenever nature overrules the canals. And one of the biggest ongoing threats there? Water management and groundwater overpumping by huge agribusinesses, which has helped sink the land, worsened flood risk, and triggered the state's first ever groundwater probation in the Tulare sub-basin. By the way, it's pronounced Tulare. Fact 20. A creek bent sideways by earthquakes. At Wallace Creek along the Carrizo Plain, you can literally see the San Andreas Fault's work. The creek once flowed straight downhill. Thousands of years of earthquakes sliding the fault sideways have offset its channel by about 430 feet, creating a dramatic dogleg bend in the stream. One major quake in 1857 is believed to have shifted part of the creek about 30 feet in a single event. Stand there with 1 foot on each side, and you're straddling 2 different tectonic plates. Fact 19. The day California almost broke the hottest rain record. On July 24, 2018, the weather station at Imperial, California measured a scorching 119 degrees Fahrenheit, 48 degrees Celsius, while thunderstorms passed overhead. For a moment, it looked like Imperial had set a world record for the hottest rain ever recorded. Later, the National Weather Service dug into the data and concluded that no actual rain reached the gauge. The droplets evaporated in the super dry air before hitting the ground. So the record got tossed, but the near miss proved a wild point. California can have storm clouds overhead while the air feels like an oven. In other words, it was too hot for the rain to survive. Fact 18. An Ice Age time capsule in downtown LA. Right off Wilshire Boulevard, the La Brea tar pits have quietly been trapping animals for tens of thousands of years. Sticky asphalt seeps formed natural traps where mammoths, dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and the scavengers chasing them got stuck and preserved. More than 3.5 million fossils representing over 600 species have been pulled from these pits, and excavations are still going. It's probably the only place on Earth where you can sit in traffic and look over at an active Ice Age dig site. Fact 17. A national park superstack, plus forests treated like crops. California has 9 national parks, more than any other state: Yosemite, Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Redwood, Lassen Volcanic, Death Valley, Joshua Tree, Pinnacles, and Channel Islands. Redwood National and State Parks sit right on the wild north coast, where giant trees practically lean over the Pacific. On top of that, California has 18 national forests entirely within the state and shares 2 more, Humboldt-Toyabe and Rogue River Siskiyou, with neighboring states, for a total of 20 national forest units on its map. Those forests are managed by the USDA, not the National Park Service, because legally, trees are treated as a renewable crop. Only in America do you get a government agency that farms giant sequoias and pines as agricultural resources. Fact 16. The Republic of Rough and Ready. In 1850, long before California officially became a state, A little mining town in Nevada County got so fed up with taxes and regulations that it seceded from the United States. They called themselves the Great Republic of Rough and Ready, elected a president, and flew their own flag. Their independence lasted about 3 months. According to local legend, nearby towns refused to sell them whiskey because they were foreigners, and the Rough and Ready folks promptly voted to rejoin the Union. Today, the town still celebrates its brief, booze-motivated revolution every year. Fact 15. ZZX, the last word in town names. Headed to Vegas on I-15, you might see an exit for Zix Road and assume your eyes glitched. ZZYZNX was deliberately chosen by a 1940s self-styled health guru who built a desert spa out there and wanted a name that would be the last word in town directories. The spa is long gone, and today the site is a desert research center, but the name stuck. Zizix is still likely the alphabetically last place name on Earth, and one of the most screenshot-worthy freeway signs in California. Fact 14. Giant trees with shallow roots and team spirit. You'd think 300-plus foot tall redwoods would anchor themselves with skyscraper deep roots, but coast redwoods usually only go 6 to 12 feet down. Their real strength comes from spreading their roots out up to 100 feet and intertwining them with neighboring trees. In a redwood grove, the forest is basically one huge living network, each tree literally holding hands underground with its neighbors. Their ability to stand through storms and earthquakes doesn't come from going deep alone, but from linking up together. Fact 13. The Lost Coast, where Highway 1 gives up. California's Highway 1 hugs the Pacific coast for hundreds of miles until it doesn't. In Humboldt and Mendocino counties, the terrain gets so steep and unstable that road builders in the 1960s simply gave up. Instead, the highway cuts inland, leaving a wild stretch known as the Lost Coast with no major paved road. Out there, mountains plunge straight into the ocean, black sand beaches feel almost empty, and elk, sea lions, and surfers share the same horizon. It's like Big Sur, but if Big Sur had said, "Nope, you're not building here." Fact 12. California's coldest night beats some northern states. People think California and picture palm trees. But in January 1937, the town of Boca near Truckee hit minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 43 degrees Celsius. Still the official state record low, colder than the record lows of states like Montana or Idaho. Boca sits in a high, bowl-shaped valley where cold air pools at night like water in a sink. On the right winter night, it becomes a natural deep freeze that proves the Golden State can flip from beach weather to Alaska-level cold. Fact 11. Bubblegum pink lakes by the airport. Fly into San Francisco or drive across the Dumbarton Bridge, and you'll spot bright pink, red, and orange ponds along the bay's edge. These are salt evaporation ponds, where seawater is concentrated to harvest salt. As salinity rises, halophilic algae and microbes explode in number, tinting the water wild colors from lime green to hot pink. From ground level, they look strange. From the air, they look like someone spilled a giant painter's palette across the Bay Area. Fact 10. Mount Shasta's hidden jade and the Klamath Fortress. In far northern California, Mount Shasta rises nearly 14,200 feet above the surrounding landscape, anchoring the rugged Klamath Mountains, a mashup of old ocean crust, volcanic rock, and chunks of ancient seafloor. Around Shasta and nearby Castle Crags, hikers can literally find naturally occurring jade and other green serpentine-type rocks along short walks, and there's still placer gold in some creeks for anyone with a pan and patience. It's one of the most geologically tangled parts of North America, a place where mountain building has glued together bits of old island chains, seafloor, and volcanic arcs into one wild, jagged fortress. Fact 9. Otherworldly tufa towers. Those strange stone spires around Mono Lake are tufa towers, underwater limestone chimneys that formed when calcium-rich spring water bubbled up into the carbonate-rich lake and precipitated solid rock around the vents. For centuries, these towers were hidden underwater until LA began diverting Mono's tributary streams in the 20th century. dropping the lake level and exposing formations that now rise up to 30 feet high. Walking through them feels less like visiting a lake and more like exploring a fossilized coral reef in the sky. Fact 8. The secret tallest tree. Deep in Redwood National Park, somewhere off trail, stands Hyperion, the tallest known tree on Earth at around 380 feet. Discovered in 2006, it's so tall it's almost hard to photograph, and its exact location is kept secret to protect its fragile root zone. In 2022, park rangers went even further and closed the surrounding area to visitors, warning that anyone trying to bushwhack to Hyperion could face hefty fines. In California, even some trees have to go into witness protection. Fact 7. The Geysers, a 24/7 steam factory. About 70 miles north of San Francisco is the Geysers, the largest geothermal power complex in the world. Instead of erupting fountains like Yellowstone, it's a sprawling field of 18 power plants tapping underground steam from more than 350 wells, generating electricity for roughly 1.5 million people at peak capacity. Drive by and you'll see plumes of white steam rising from hillsides like a sci-fi industrial landscape. It's one of the world's biggest demonstrations that a fault-ridden state can turn its geology into green energy. Fact 6. Bison on the beach and in the park. You expect to see bison in Yellowstone, not on an island off Los Angeles. But Santa Catalina Island has a herd of around 100 to 150 American bison, descended from animals brought over for a 1920s film shoot and never taken back. They're not alone. Golden Gate Park in San Francisco also maintains a small bison paddock in a big meadow, so you can see shaggy plains animals with the Golden Gate Bridge just a few miles away. And along parts of California's Redwood coast, ranches have cows literally grazing on the beach, wandering the sand next to crashing waves. California, come for the surf, stay for the livestock. Fact 5. Trona Pinnacles, Hollywood's fake planets. Near the town of Trona, on the edge of the Mojave, sit more than 500 tufa spires rising from the dry bed of ancient Searles Lake. The Trona Pinnacles. Many stand over 100 feet tall and are so otherworldly that Hollywood keeps coming back to film science fiction scenes there, from Planet of the Apes to spaceship landings. They formed underwater between about 10,000 and 100,000 years ago, when mineral-rich springs met an alkaline lake. Today, it's one of the easiest places in California to feel like you've road-tripped to Mars. Fact 4. Pocket-sized island foxes. On 6 of the 8 Channel Islands lives the island fox, North America's smallest wild canid, about the size of a chihuahua, just 4 to 5 pounds. Each island population evolved into its own subspecies after gray foxes reached the islands thousands of years ago, and then shrank to fit a world with limited food and no big predators. By the early 2000s, several island fox populations were on the brink of extinction, but an aggressive recovery effort, captive breeding, golden eagle relocation, and feral pig removal turned it into one of the fastest successful endangered species recoveries ever. Fact 3. The year California turned into an inland sea. In the winter of 1861 to 1862, a relentless series of storms hammered California for weeks. Rivers burst their banks, and the Central Valley transformed into a 300-mile-long, 20-mile-wide inland sea, with some areas under 30 feet of water. The state capital in Sacramento flooded so badly that lawmakers temporarily moved government operations to San Francisco. Modern USGS-ARK storm scenarios suggest that if a similar event happened today, damages could easily top hundreds of billions of dollars, turning freeways and bedroom communities into temporary lakefront property. Fact 2. A tree older than the pyramids. High in California's White Mountains, twisted Great Basin bristlecone pines cling to rocky slopes above 10,000 feet. One famous tree named Methuselah is over 4,800 years old. Even older, scientists have dated an unnamed bristlecone nearby at more than 5,000 years, making it the oldest known non-clonal tree on Earth. These trees were already ancient when Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza were under construction. They've watched entire civilizations rise and fall while quietly photosynthesizing in thin mountain air. Fact 1. The Opera House for an imaginary audience. In the tiny desert outpost of Death Valley Junction, a former ballerina named Marta Beckett stumbled on an abandoned social hall in the 1960s and turned it into the Amargosa Opera House. She hand-painted elaborate murals of an audience on the walls and ceiling, then performed dance and pantomime shows on that stage for decades, sometimes with no live audience at all, just her painted one. If there's a single story that sums up California, it's this: a remote desert town, an artist with an improbable dream, and a theater full of ghosts that somehow becomes a legend. So that's California, a place where lakes reappear after a century, trees drink fog and outlive empires, and a mud puddle can shut down a railroad. If you're from California, drop your local corrections and secret facts in the comments. The people who live there always have the best details, and we'll feature the sharpest ones in a future video. And if you want to see more deep dive, fact-checked breakdowns of the places shaping our world, subscribe to The World Blueprint. We're mapping the planet, one unbelievable story at a time. My name is Paul. Thanks for watching.